Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we are undertaking a truly chaotic mission.
Yeah.
We have a stack of sources that explore the absolute extremes of human behavior.
Yeah.
I mean, from the almost spiritual discipline of elite athletes to, well, to the moments when accountability just collapses.
That's right. Our core mission here is really synthesis. We're going to start inside the cage, looking at, the brutal meritocracy of combat sports.
And the biological limits of the body.
Exactly. Then we're going to pivot and see how that whole concept of discipline, or the lack of it, plays out in the world of institutional power, politics, and even cultural trends.
So we're looking for the common thread between suffering, success, and systemic failure.
That's the goal.
Okay, let's jump right into that apex of discipline. We have to start with the Dagestani dominance in MMA.
It's a phenomenon.
You look at Islam Makhachev, I mean, he was arguably the most dominant 155-pound champion we've seen, and then he just moves up to 170.
A weight class full of killers.
Full of killers, and he just dominates every single round. It was seamless.
What's so fascinating here is how his success really shows the evolution of the sport. People always bring up Khabib Nurmagomedov.
Of course, the original.
Right. But Khabib's stand-up, it was always a means to an end. It was, kind of rudimentary boxing just to stun you so he could drag you to the ground.
But Islam is a completely different technical monster. He's not just surviving on his feet. He's winning.
Precisely. Islam has a sophisticated, excellent stand-up game. I mean, he's KOing people. He head-kicked Alexander Volkanovski, who is one of the toughest fighters on the planet.
So the system has evolved.
It has. The Dagestani system has created these truly well-rounded martial artists who still have that, that bedrock of wrestling.
Which lets them choose where the fight takes place.
Exactly. And it all comes back to the culture. That's the key takeaway from the sources.
Right. Bilal Muhammad, who's an elite fighter himself, trained there, and he's
blown away.
Yeah. He thought he knew what hard training was until he went to Dagestan. It's not just intense, it's total immersion.
It's that iron sharpens iron idea, just taken to the absolute extreme. The environment is described as just training with a bunch of animals.
They eat and live together.
But the discipline is cultural, too. The sources highlight how religious they are, praying 5 times a day.
And there's a total abstinence from all the modern vices.
Yeah, no gambling, no drinking, no partying. They just channel that entire energy into the craft.
And that complete commitment is why wrestling is still, the premier base for MMA.
It is.
It demands that you learn to train to suffer in a way that other combat sports just don't.
And it creates a, frankly, dangerous mental framework. We see the real-world costs of that dedication in some of the stories about extreme weight cutting.
Oh, yeah.
Like the high school wrestler described in the sources who cut so much weight for so long that it might have permanently stunted his growth.
That's a physical price you pay for that dedication.
Or the other athlete who was so extreme, he actually, broke his own body's signal.
He forgets to eat, right?
Yeah, he stopped wrestling, and now he just forgets to eat because his body is so disconnected from natural hunger cues.
Wow. And that discipline, cutting 20 pounds in a week, it often warps your relationship with food forever.
For sure. Once they start competing, the pressure is gone. And it's so common for them to develop eating disorders or just, blow up like balloons.
The very thing that made them champions is what causes long-term health problems.
Exactly.
That mindset of pushing past failure, that brings us to the ultimate example of physical suffering. David Goggins.
The Navy SEAL, yeah.
The account of Jesse Itzler living with him is, sure, it's motivational.
Yeah.
But what Goggins did to himself physically, it goes way beyond motivation. It led to a life-threatening condition.
This is where we hit the biological breaking point. Goggins got rhabdomyolysis, or rhabdo.
We should probably explain what that is.
Yeah, we need to. It's not just being sore. It's acute muscle tissue death from excessive exercise. The muscle fibers literally break down and leak proteins like myoglobin into your bloodstream.
And that's where it gets really, really dangerous, right? When those proteins get to your kidney.
Exactly. The kidneys just get overwhelmed. The myoglobin clogs them up, and it leads to acute kidney failure.
And the chilling sign the sources point to is when your urine turns. What was it?
Dark brown or red, like Diet Coke. That's your body signaling a complete system failure.
And Goggins' response to nearly dying from this.
It's insane. He finishes the race after being in the hospital, and then does 100 push-ups at the finish line, just because he could.
It shows that total disconnect between self-preservation and that competitive drive.
And that extreme effort helps us understand a pretty disappointing truth about calories.
Oh, yeah. The runner who ran 30 miles.
Right. 30 miles over 10 hours. A full day of brutal activity, and he only burned 1,000 calories.
1,000 calories. So that one day of just monumental suffering only cancels out a small part of, say, a 10,000 calorie cheat meal.
The quantitative insight here is so powerful. Your body is incredibly efficient. It's resistant to burning stored calories through exercise alone.
So what does this all mean for you if you're just focused on weight management?
The core insight is, it's undeniable. The diet is everything.
You don't lose weight in the gym.
The gym is crucial for health, for fitness, sure, but the math doesn't lie. Weight loss is like 90% discipline over what you put in your mouth.
It's fighting the consumption habit, not just the inertia habit.
Exactly. Now, let's look at a scientific application of this kind of discipline, but aimed at optimizing performance. The altitude advantage.
Sleep high, train low.
That's the one.
So we all know athletes train at elevation, but why is that split sleeping high and training low the magic formula?
It's about maximizing two different biological effects at the same time. So when you sleep at high elevation, say 6,000, 12,000 feet, your body recognizes there's less oxygen.
And it adapts.
It reacts by producing more of the hormone EPO, erythropoietin. This boosts your red blood cell count so your blood can carry more oxygen.
So you get the performance benefit while you're just sleeping, but then why go back down to train low at sea level?
Because that low oxygen environment at high altitude actually limits your power output. If you train back at sea level, you can do higher quality reps, sprint faster, lift heavier.
Because oxygen isn't the limiting factor.
Exactly. You get the biological benefits of high altitude without sacrificing the quality of your actual training.
And the case study for this is perfect. Fabricio Verdum preparing for Cain Velasquez in Mexico City.
Yeah, Mexico City is at 7,350 feet.
Right. So Verdum, understanding the science, gets there 2 months early and trains even higher, at 12,000 feet.
While Cain Velasquez, who was the heavy favorite, only shows up 10 days before the fight.
And Velasquez just gassed out almost immediately. He was completely unprepared for the altitude and got submitted easily.
That scientific discipline, that was the difference between winning and losing the heavyweight title.
That sets us up perfectly, because now we're talking about the highest level of achievement, the duet debate.
The greatest heavyweight of all time.
You usually hear names like Fedor, John Jones, maybe Stipe Miocic. Stipe has the record for title defenses, right? 4.
He does. But Verdum, ironically, has this unique claim based on pure merit and the names on his resume.
His argument for GOAT status comes from submitting 3 fighters who are themselves in that conversation.
And in their prime, too.
Yeah.
Fedor Emelianenko, Cain Velasquez, and Minotaur Nogueira. To tap out 3 legends like that, it's a unique, undeniable metric of success.
That pure, undeniable metric, the submission, the knockout, the crowd's reaction, that leads us to the only other true meritocracy we cover today.
Stand-up comedy.
Yes.
Comedy at its core is a perfect meritocracy. The sources argue you can't cheat the crowd. You either get the laugh or you don't.
The feedback is immediate and unarguable. No quota, no political correctness, no amount of industry hype can make a bad joke funny.
But the second that pure meritocracy leaves the stage, you start to see the chaos of institutional failure creep in. The sources are pretty critical of industry tastemakers.
Who give up their own convictions.
That's the breakdown of discipline. These people stop trusting their gut about who's funny. Instead, they wait for the industry to signal who's popping.
They become reactive followers, not leaders.
And that reliance on external validation instead of the internal standard of, is this funny, is why some major festivals are just becoming irrelevant.
And this non-meritocratic pressure filters down to the clubs. We see bookers, like Adam Egypt, facing explicit pressure to meet demographic quotas.
Right. Instead of just prioritizing who is the funniest, the goal shifts from performance excellence to, box ticking.
It just corrodes the whole art form.
And if we want to talk about true cultural chaos, look at the viral phenomena that succeed based on pure, irrational engagement.
This is where it gets really interesting. Baby Shark, 16.4 billion views.
That is an astronomical number.
An astronomical success. But the company behind it, Pinkfong, made $67 million in revenue. Which sounds huge, but they were actually hampered by ad restrictions on kids' content.
So the platform regulated what they could earn on their own massive success.
Exactly. Now contrast that with Labubu's, the viral collectible toy that's basically a real-life loot box.
People buy a mystery box for around $28.
Just hoping for that limited edition collectible. It feeds that gambling thrill, that scarcity mindset. The resale price can jump to $80 or $120.
And the object itself has almost no intrinsic value. It's just market chaos driven by scarcity and the thrill of the pull.
So we move from that irrational market chaos to the much darker chaos of institutional secrecy and political power.
We have to talk about the Epstein files.
The congressional vote to release the files was 427 to 1.
Just one dissenting vote? Clay Higgins.
Right, and his argument was about criminal justice procedure. He said that releasing the files this way, through legislation instead of the courts, would injure thousands of innocent witnesses or family members.
People named in the files but not criminally implicated.
But let's challenge that. Is the political injury, the injury to public trust from shielding powerful names, not greater than that potential legal risk?
Well, the public suspicion is that very powerful people, Supreme Court justices, royals, prime ministers, are trying to control whose names get revealed.
And we saw immediate consequences. Prince Andrew was publicly exiled, right?
Okay. Stripped of his royal titles, banished to a countryside estate. It shows that the institutional powers involved were and still are massive. The consequences are real.
When institutions fail to be transparent or when they fail to maintain order, the consequences can be devastating.
And permanent.
Which shifts us to historical violence. Starting with the Tulsa Massacre in 1921, the destruction of Black Wall Street.
This was racial jealousy just erupting into full-scale violence. The trigger was an accusation that a black man, Dick Rowland, assaulted a white elevator operator.
And that spiraled into a riot, a rolling gunfight.
And the leveling of the entire Greenwood district.
35 square blocks destroyed, over 800 people hospitalized, and the casualty estimates range from 36 to 300 dead.
But what's really damning in the sources is the aftermath, the institutional cover-up. It was essentially erased from history books for decades.
And the effects are still felt. The community has never fully recovered.
And the sources note the complexity even now, with, limits on how explicitly the event can be taught in some schools, describing it vaguely as a conflict between Group A and Group B.
Instead of facing the racial hatred and the institutional failure head-on, we'll conclude this dark chapter with two examples where government action meant to enforce the law resulted in catastrophic overreach.
First, Ruby Ridge in 1992, Idaho.
U.S. Marshals were trying to arrest Randy Weaver for federal firearms charges, a relatively minor thing.
The situation just escalated dramatically. There was a confrontation, and Weaver's dog and his 14-year-old son were killed.
Then the FBI joined the standoff. The outcome was just horrific. Weaver's wife, Vicky, was shot and killed by an FBI sniper while she was holding her infant daughter.
And after all that violence, all that loss of life caused by federal escalation, Weaver was ultimately only convicted on a minor charge of failing to appear in court.
And then, the very next year, you have Waco, Texas, the siege against David Koresh's Branch Davidians.
Right, the initial raid was based on alleged firearms violations, but it expanded to accusations of abuse.
And the government's decision to escalate after that initial failed raid led to a 51-day standoff, the final assault.
Resulted in the compound catching fire and the mass deaths of men, women, and children.
Both Ruby Ridge and Waco are just. They're devastating historical examples of federal agencies losing the discipline and restraint necessary.
And it forces us to synthesize the two extremes we've explored today.
Yeah.
On one hand, you have the ultimate self-control, that ascetic, almost spiritual discipline of a Dagestani fighter.
And on the other, you have this overwhelming lack of control and accountability when institutions fail.
Whether it's in historical violence or, modern fiscal mismanagement.
We saw that fiscal chaos in California. They went from a stunning $97.5 billion surplus in 2022
to a multi-billion-dollar deficit just 2 years later, a complete reversal.
because they massively overestimated revenue while committing to permanent spending increases. It's the definition of institutional indiscipline.
The sources really show us that success and failure on the mat, in the comedy club, in government, it often just comes down to discipline and sticking to a clear standard.
Comedy demands the meritocracy. The feedback is immediate.
But in politics, in history, in government finance, the feedback is slow, power is opaque, and they often fail that test spectacularly.
So as you reflect on this deep dive, consider this final thought. The Dagestanis, who achieve dominance through a rigid, unyielding commitment to their standards, operate on the principle that the highest rewards only come from accepting the highest suffering. When institutions like governments or intelligence agencies ignore that required discipline and fail their own standards, what is the proportional level of suffering or chaos that should follow?